Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for the next edition of edTrends. My name is Jason Lane. I'm the Dean of the School of Education here at the University at Albany. We are thrilled to have you all with us for our ongoing conversation about learning and the intersection with COVID in many ways. And that as that continues, it's been a great opportunity to really explore, I think, new opportunities for teaching and learning. And so with that, today, we'll be focusing on high quality virtual professional learning supports for K-12 educators. And my thanks go to our colleagues at Cognia, the UF Lossinger Center at the University at Florida, and PK Young for being here as part of the panel today. And so with that, Jerry, I'm going to turn it over to you to start the video.
I'll go ahead and just jump in. Oh, Vimeo, pardon me.
So with that, my thanks to Jerry and the team for creating the video. And we will turn it over to Phil to start us on the panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Phil Pogert. I'm the director of the University of Florida's Lastinger Center for Learning. Really pleased here to be here as the moderator for this really great panel on virtual professional learning supports, and really appreciate the collaboration with the State University of New York at Albany and the edTrends series. So we are really excited to bring to you a number of distinguished panelists. Some of my colleagues here at the University of Florida. We have Christy Gabbard and Gabriel Lee from the PK Young Developmental Research School here in Gainesville, Florida. And we're also joined by Lisa Allison of the Charleston County School District, who we're really proud to call a partner as well. And so I'm really excited about serving as your moderator. I want to stay out of the way of the panelists so we can hear from their wisdom and their experience as they've navigated pandemic school and brought about virtual professional learning supports to help teachers to implement evidence-based strategies that help students to learn and grow. To orient you to what we're going to be doing together, we're going to begin by asking each of the panelists just to share a little bit about the context in which they work, a little bit about their role, and other things that are going to be helpful to setting the stage for the remainder of the conversation. Then we'll move into the content of the professional learning that they've put together, really focusing on those approaches that help to implement evidence-based strategies. We're going to move into coaching and mentoring and what that has looked like within a virtual environment. We'll touch upon community building and how that was successful in establishing learning communities among teams of teachers within the context of virtual professional learning. And if time allows, we'll touch a little bit around some of the tech tools that have been helpful to them, and maybe have some fun with some rapid fire questions at the end, hopefully sharing some additional tips and tricks that they've been able to develop over some time. And so without further ado, I am going to get us started. And so I wanted to begin with that first question, just about context. If you could share a little bit about your role, a little bit about your context. Tell us maybe a little bit about the instructional modalities that you have been using within your setting, and how that might have developed over time, and any other useful background context that would be helpful to our attendees in understanding some of the rest of the discussion that we're going to be having here today. And so I wanted to begin with my colleague, Christy Gabbard. If you could go ahead and kick us off and get us started. Thanks, Christy.
Sure. Thanks, Phil. We are, Gabe and I are together here at PK Young Developmental Research School. We are a K-12 school setting that has about 1,355 learners across K-12. And our mission is both to educate those 1,355 learners, but also to test and disseminate best practice across the state, a nation. We do try to do outreach internationally when possible. So we have a thriving brick and mortar campus. And in terms of our instruction, we also have what we like to consider kind of a technology enhanced, or sometimes we use the language of blended model, meaning that our courses have a pretty strong digital representation as well. We use a learning management system as a core part of our work in grades 4 through 12. So some of those pieces were already in place, and I think that they're, relevant as we continue in the conversation. Like, what were our teachers familiar with as we were making some of these transitions later on?
Thanks, Christy. Appreciate you getting us started. I was going to ask Gabe, maybe you could talk a little bit more and add anything specific to your role at PK Young in context that we'll need.
Sure. My name is Gabe Lee. I am the Technology Integration Specialist at PK Young. So my role is to help teachers integrate technology into their practice. We have had quite a few modalities of teaching since the pandemic started. We went into full virtual mode for a while. We went into a sort of a hybrid blended model where some students were on campus, but they were still fully virtually. And then now we're in a high flex model where we're teaching students both on campus and off campus at the same time. And so, like Christy said, we use Canvas as our LMS. So we have an LMS that we had been using prior to the pandemic starting. And so that has been helpful for us because a lot of our teachers had that experience beforehand. And we've worked really hard to try to help individual teachers do the best that they can in this situation. That's what we've been really focused on. Thanks.
Thanks, Gabe. Lisa, you're in a different circumstance in Charleston. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, sir. Hi, everyone. I'm the Director of Intervention and Psych Services here in Charleston, South Carolina. We are the second largest school district in the state. We have about 50,000 scholars in our district and 87 schools and programs. My role is to work directly with our intervention programs. So we have about 100 literacy and math interventionists who are providing supplemental supports to our students. But our department rests in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction. So we also work with our instructional coaches and provide direct professional development to teachers as well. This is our first year with an LMS here that's standard across all teachers. We are using Canvas as well, so that was a big learning curve for all of us. And we've had different learning modalities, much like Gabe and Christy have mentioned. We actually started back 5 days a week in person for those students and families who wanted it. And then we have had remote learners from home. We have had remote learners within the school building with proctors. And we do have actually a fully centralized virtual academy here in Charleston as well. So we've had a variety of different modalities, and that has led us to be prepared with a variety of different coaching and mentoring for our teachers.
Thanks so much for that, Lisa. So now that we have some of that context as background, we wanted to dig into a little bit of the content. We really wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about how you've been able to utilize virtual professional development opportunities to really promote evidence-based instructional strategies among your teachers. And so I want to bring it back to Christy to get us started on this question as well. Tell us a little bit about what you've been able to do, particularly over the last year at PK Young, to help promote high-quality instructional strategies.
Thanks, Phil. So This transition came upon us pretty quickly. And one of the things that we needed to do was we needed to make that transition focused in kind of a short term. And when I say short term, I mean within 72 hour to a week kind of professional learning strategy for teachers, and really focus in on the most pressing needs that they were going to have within those 72 hours to a week, and get some real clarity around goals, which is, of course, one of the main tenets of, around professional learning is let's be really clear about what we're trying to do, what the goal is. So we focused in on a few strategic moves to help teachers stay connected to their students. We thought quickly but deeply about what the tenets of our practice are around student-centered learning, around collaboration, around mastery and supporting students to share in ownership of those goals, make sure that we weren't going to lose track of student agency as we were making these transitions. And then, in that short term, we really tried to meet, as Gabe said earlier, individual teachers where they were, and take small steps. Remembering, as Lisa talked about the last time we were together, that this is hard. And we need to also honor and remember that our teachers are going to need a lot of support and a lot of grace as we move through this process. So that was kind of our short-term strategy. And then as we moved into the longer term, it has become about a lot more around virtual instructional design and teaching in those virtual environments. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I'll give it to someone else to share.
Thank you, Christy. And Gabe, I was hoping you could build on that a little bit from your role in instructional technology support. How were you able to use these PD strategies?
Well, one of the things that we really tried to do, especially because it was such a short term, we tried to model the strategies and the behaviors that we hoped our teachers would provide for their students. So we used Zoom quite a bit. Our teachers all used Zoom for their classes. And so we would model breakout rooms. We would model ways that they could use Zoom or Canvas to get links to students. We also used a program called Hapara, which helps bring students into Zoom meetings and to provide links. So we also modeled some of that. So we were really trying to make sure that the tools that we were hoping teachers were using were the tools that we provided and we modeled. What we found was the most effective way for professional development was really one-to-one or small groups, that when in this virtual space, having large groups of teachers really was not an effective way to get our message across and to help teachers individually. So we would set up small individual meetings with teachers to really help them with these new tools. And I mean, our biggest goal was to try to prevent the technology from being a barrier to learning. And so, because we were separated and physically distanced, we wanted to make the technology the least of the barriers that are preventing learning from happening.
Thanks, Gabe. Appreciate that, and certainly hope we get the chance to hear a little bit more about some of those tools that you were able to use in promoting high-quality professional development. Let's turn to Lisa and just hear about what the focus was in Charleston. What were you all doing to promote high-quality instructional strategies?
Well, much like Christy said, first and foremost, we recognize that it is very difficult. And so honoring that struggle. And as Gabe mentioned, we did a lot of modeling, and part of that was modeling the struggle. So we took on Canvas as professional deliverers, we had not used Canvas ourselves. So that was the first thing we took on. So we were able to relate right out of the gate to say, yes, okay, we understand that this is a lot to navigate. And we're going to show you some tricks that we've learned as you prepare to use this now as the platform for your student learning. And so setting those expectations and norms were also really important. We have a saying here, I will say in part of my department is psychological services. I'm a school psychologist. It's my background. And so here we have a saying of connection before content. And so we really tried to model that with our teachers as well. So recognizing that people were feeling disconnected, stressed, worried, and then balancing the technology, like Gabe said. So trying to clear that path, but also putting the human factor first. And so modeling that in our expectations, in our norms for our professional development, and then also providing opportunities for synchronous and asynchronous learning. So recognizing that the saturation effect of too much time on a Zoom, for example, or too much time looking at it, we just had to build that tolerance for that kind of learning and professional development. So providing opportunities to have it flipped, do some pre-learning and then join our session and then joining conversation around that pre-learning material. So that was an effective strategy for us as well. One really specific thing in my department that we had to overcome was helping our interventionists. And we have a variety of types of interventionists. Some are certified and some are non-certified, and some have a lot of experience and some are coming to us brand new. So helping them not just understand their craft as providing support services, but then also needing to learn how to do that remotely. So really providing a lot of small group, one-on-one support around that, and helping them understand how to turn their intervention materials that are pretty scripted for them for that reason, so that they can deliver it easily, how to turn that into a remote learning delivery method. So a lot of work around that specifically.
Certainly is one of the many challenges turning what was in-person interventions and in-person instruction into virtual professional development and virtual instruction and intervention. And so appreciate you sharing that with us. It's an important example of the content that we were trying to communicate and make sure that teachers were giving kids what they needed. And we also know getting teachers what they need is going to involve some additional supports, not just high quality and evidence-based content, but also these coaching and mentoring kinds of supports. And so I want to transition us to that, because now that we were using all of these new tools, Canvas, Zoom, and the like, we're curious about what kinds of coaching and mentoring you were able to provide in these virtual environments. What did instructional leadership look like in those contexts? And so I was hoping, Gabe, if you could kick us off on this one. What did it look like at PK Young as you transitioned to these virtual environments?
Well, at PK Young, we're a small school in a small district, which allowed for real personal connections with the teachers. Like, I know all of our teachers personally, and because we started in March and we had some time in person, so we built those relationships. So with myself being able to then go in and support them on these one-to-one in the moment support calls was really, really helpful. Oftentimes teachers would just have their synchronous Zoom class starting, and maybe they weren't signed into the right Zoom account, or maybe they were sending students to the wrong Zoom link. And so because we used multiple ways to connect with me, I could connect with them on Teams and sort of help solve the problem with them while they're still in with their students in Zoom or still working with Zoom. They're able to share their screen with me while still being working with their students. There are lots of ways that I could still sort of come into their virtual environment, but still be separate from them. And so what I think the pandemic really allowed for is really that in the moment, right when they needed support, when oftentimes if we were in person learning, I would have to walk to their classroom, or it might take a little bit longer for me to get to help and support. And in in these times that I could help almost immediately. And so I think teachers appreciated that, that, they're in a panic and all of a sudden someone can come in and sort of just sort of relieve some of that pressure. And I think that that was really helpful for our teachers.
Thanks, Gabe. It's fascinating to hear how you've been able to use the tools to support each other. And so appreciate that illustration. Thanks so much. Lisa, why don't you tell us a little bit about what coaching and mentoring look like in Charleston? How were you able to do it in the virtual environment?
So like I said, we're the second largest district in South Carolina. We cover a lot of ground. So we have rural, suburban, urban schools, about 1,000 square miles, actually, tip to tip for our county. So professional development, gathering our group. So specifically for me, if I think about, 80 literacy interventionists, let's say, in professional development, that scramble for space, that creating opportunities for small group work. We had a lot of stand and deliver kind of professional development. So I will have to say that the virtual environment, much like Gabe mentioned, allowed for providing more immediate support at point of struggle or point of difficulty. It has also provided us with the opportunity for peer coaching. And so we had some people right out of the gate who were, they really absorbed this new way of teaching and learning and became little mini experts. And so instead of us feeling like we had to be the expert all the time, we relied on these leaders within our group to then help others. And because of the virtual environment, they were able to, have those little breakout rooms, lead a session that was like a pop-up session, have some office hours where people could drop in. And so our whole method of providing that initial professional development and then that subsequent coaching and mentoring has really been wide opened for us. We have lots of different modalities and lots of different opportunities. And I will say, again, the largest one has been for the leadership within the group to develop. And that's been a really exciting thing to see.
Thanks so much. It's really great to hear how it's opened up new opportunities and access to everyone across that rather large geographic space and just created new possibilities in terms of how teachers collaborate across that space. Appreciate you sharing that, Lisa. Coming back to you, Christy, what do you want to add to this in terms of the work that you do and focus on programming? What would you add to this part around coaching and mentoring?
Sorry, I left myself on mute. I was listening to Lisa and Gabe and thinking about that in the instructional leadership part of the question. And just as we have made this transition, we've had to do a lot of thinking about presence as leaders within the school and how we maintain that connectivity to the classroom spaces, to the learning spaces, to our teachers. And so we too have leveraged the tools in different ways. And I would agree with both Lisa and Gabe. In some ways, it's interesting because I think that in some ways I do feel a little bit more responsive in terms of being able to answer a question really quickly because our faculty and our staff have become more connected with tools like Teams. And that was a tool that we had access to, we knew about, but we really didn't use Teams much prior to making this transition. And now I would argue that Teams is a pretty core component of the way that we communicate across the entire school. And, teachers' Zoom rooms became their classrooms, as Gabe said. So then putting structures in place where leaders and support staff and others would always be able to get to that room. I know how to walk down the hallway to room 121, but if I need to really quickly get into a teacher's Zoom room because I want to observe instruction or interact with students or whatever. So we put a lot of communication pieces and structures and resources. And, there was a lot happening on the back end to make sure that we all had the information that we needed. So we knew how to find one another. And then I think lastly, the thing that comes to mind is, again, connecting with Lisa's really important point about connection first, that in some ways we had to be even more intentional about our availability. And I leave my Zoom room open and have schedules where people know they can, sometimes I will work and my Zoom room is just open sitting here. People know they can get me in Teams. We started opening up for connections. There's the protocol connections. We started opening up for connections time about 30 minutes in advance of official meeting time or professional learning time, or 15 minutes in advance, depending on what the schedule looks like. But to really create that space and honor that space that people needed to know where to find us as leaders. And sometimes I think we take for granted that people know they can. My door, I don't know if you guys can tell, has opened a few times since we've been sitting here. My real door, my real life door. But yeah, so just those are some of the things that we had to really think about to keep that mentoring, coaching, leadership component in place.
Thanks, Krista. I really appreciated the comments just in terms of how rapidly we adopted and socialized these new tools, and they became such vital parts of this, and the way you ended just in terms of that space that you were able to create in order to establish the connection. I think it's a really good segue to our next conversation, which is about community, right? So given how virtual collaborations, can sometimes strain those connections, like what have we been able to do to establish community in these spaces and reinforce what we know, this relationship-based aspects of professional development, so that we can help teachers to learn from one another. How have you been able to create community to develop relationships in virtual settings? Since that's been such a major focus in Charleston, I'd love for you to start this one off for us, Lisa.
Sure thing, happy to. So we provided an early commitment as a leadership team to each other about adult self-care and adult, protecting that space for adults to share their struggle in a way that was not judgmental, not evaluative, but just simply to listen to them and have them listen to each other. So we have been providing listening sessions for our staff since the beginning of the year. And actually we started in the summer prior to school starting. We have a number of people in our district who are restorative practices trained, myself being one of them. And so we centered those circles with that idea. And so we just opened them up. There was just come, if you want to. No one had to come, of course. They're all virtual. So again, we were modeling the platform, modeling the connection that we hoped they would do with their students as well, but then also providing an opportunity and a forum for them to just share. And so we structured it to ask 4 simple questions. One was, what brought you here? The second was, what have you been thinking and feeling? The third was, what has been the hardest thing for you? And the fourth was leaving it on an element of an action plan. What is something in your control that you can do within the coming days and weeks? And it was really helpful for us to, not just provide that for them, but for us to understand as district leaders what the teachers and staff and support staff were experiencing. And so we could take that back to our leadership team at the district level to say, okay, these are some things we need to respond to in an indirect or direct way. And again, modeling that connection before content for teachers. And we provided them with some resources for how to set the stage for those connections with students, because that comes really naturally for some teachers, and for others, they needed help with that. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is we're trying to create a larger community of connection, even through a remote learning situation, recognizing that people were struggling, recognizing that there was a lot of anxiety and stress going on, and embedding the use of the platforms and modeling that usage for others while also getting that at that adult self-care. And we're continuing those listening sessions, and we're seeing them grow, and we're seeing the response be very positive, and in fact, more requests for that as we've gone through the year. So
I think those 4 questions are just so important, and really appreciate Charleston being a leader and showing the importance of self-care, modeling that for teachers, so that in the hopes that they'll model it for their students as well, so that we can make sure that everyone's taking care of themselves, engaging in reflection, and also gathering important information that leadership and teachers know about things that supports they can provide. So really appreciate that. So let's turn it back to PK Young. Christy, you touched upon this importance of connection the importance of connection as well. So what were you able to do at PK to establish these relationships?
Yeah, so we admittedly, I would say prior to this major transition that we went through, we had a partnership, and still have a strong partnership with the River Phoenix Center for Peace Building, and implementation of restorative practice work within our entire school community. But we were very, very heavily turned toward our students and toward student to teacher relationships, and the application of that work in that space, and perhaps not as much focused in on the internal health and well-being of each of our faculty and staff members, both as professionals, but then, just as a human, and setting aside time for that self-care and really making that a primary focus, and really focusing in on some of those adult connections and relationships. I think we took a lot of that for granted because we had lots of social structures and things that we did together that were fun, and the Christmas parties and the before school parties and the happy hours and the social times, and all of those things were part of our work, and not necessarily this really intentional embedded piece around self-care. And that was a shift that we made. And so now, as we structure professional learning for our faculty and for our staff, we are increasingly intentional about our partnerships with both our internal counseling team, school psychologists, making sure that we have session time set aside. We've also implemented circles as a core part of coming together in our professional learning in Zoom or in Teams, and having people in small groups doing that circle time. So lots of similarity with the work that's happening in Charleston with Lisa, with the difference being, I think it sounds like perhaps Lisa was a little more focused in that place prior to the transition. And for us, admittedly, that's something that we really were able to see as a place that we needed to work on our practice and what was happening. So yeah, that's us.
Thank you, Christy. So Gabe, building on what Christy described at PK Young in terms of how you all created community, what other ahas did you have, or practices reinforced, or things you identified you all needed to work on more? What do you have to add here?
Well, one of the things that, in thinking back on to the start of the new school year, was how it was just a real challenge to help introduce new teachers to PK Young into our community and into our habits. And when the only way that we were meeting was virtually, and it was really hard to develop those relationships for new teachers. I think in looking back on it, as my role in helping support with technology, it was hard for me to know where each of those teachers were in terms of the skills that they had, what they needed direct support on. So in looking back at it, and how we might do something different, is just to think about ways, and hopefully we're not having to do all virtual again, but thinking about ways that we can help support those brand new teachers to our school and to our district, and how to get them the support that they need as they're transitioning into this new place. And I haven't come up with a great solution yet, but that's something that I've been thinking about and hoping that we can improve.
I think this has been a learning experience for all of us, so it's important for us to realize the things that we still have work to do, where we still have work to do. So thank you for sharing that, Gabe, and appreciate the insights there. I see that we are going to have some time to get into the tech tools, and so I wanted to transition into that discussion. But I also wanted our attendees to start thinking about any questions that they might have for the panelists, because we'll be making some time there at the end. And so if you could go ahead and start putting any questions that you might have for the panelists, you could start entering those into the Q&A function there in Zoom. And we'll come to those at the appropriate time. But I'm going to keep us moving through the conversation here around tech tools, and then we'll come back and moderate those discussions momentarily. So since we have some of the time, let's dig in. We've mentioned a few tools that we've heard, other innovations or platforms that you've been using. Anything that you want to add in terms of other tools or platforms that you've been using at PK Young, Christy?
Yeah, so when I get into specific tools, I tend to lean on Gabe. So I will, I'll have him, of course, add to anything I'm leaving out or forgetting. But we use Canvas as our learning management system. I think, as we've mentioned, we use Zoom as the tool that teachers are hosting their classrooms are hosted within Zoom. And then we use a tool called Hapara that basically allows us to have a little more connectedness with what's happening within an individual student's device. And, you know, if questions arise from the attendees and people want to know more about what that looks like or how it works, but it allows us to control focus sessions for students. So especially with our youngest learners and transitioning from kiddos and families that were used to sending their K-3 learners to a brick and mortar school, you know, sending a device home and figuring out different tools and ways to make sure that that teacher could connect with that kid. So if the device is on and open and set up, then the teacher can essentially control the device a bit and bring themselves into that child's, you know, learning space and talk to them. Lots of reports from parents that they'll be in the next room and they hear, you know, the teacher yelling for, you know, Phil, come to the computer. So Hapara has been a huge support in not just with our youngest learners, but with some of our older learners as well, keeping them focused and supporting them in their learning.
Thanks for sharing that. Christy, sounds like a really useful tool. And Gabe, it sounds like she handed it off right to you right at the start of that answer. So what do you want to add in terms of other things that you've been using to innovate at PK Young?
Well, I mean, the one thing that I would say that we've been really lucky is that we basically were already a one-to-one Chromebook school. So we had enough devices that we could send to students. Luckily, we were in a transition where we're at end of life for some of our Chromebooks. So we had plenty of Chromebooks to spare to make sure that everyone had one. That was helpful. And then we also were able to get some hotspots so that everybody had internet connection. That was incredibly helpful to make sure that all of our students had access, because I know that can be hard. One of the other things in terms of Canvas that I think has been really helpful is we've created a template so that all of our Canvas courses look the same across classes, and so that the cognitive load of where things are within Canvas is reduced a bit. So we really tried to focus on that. We also, you know, if anybody has used Canvas before, on the left-hand side, there are all of these little buttons that you can press and places that you can go. We really tried to keep things simplified. So we tried to get all of the teachers to use modules, and then we took all of the connections to assignments and all of that away so that students would have one place to go and one place to get all of the content that they were looking for. So we really tried to simplify things within Canvas, and I think that has really helped both for our students and also for our parents, because our parents have access into Canvas, so that when parents go in, they also can see that things look the same and find things easily. Again, it's that those communication tools have been just so helpful. Those individualized communication tools to help with teachers have been great. Teams and Zoom, and having both available has been really great.
Thank you so much, Gabe, and appreciate you, talking about access, which was a pretty critical issue for so many at the start of the pandemic, and the solutions that you were able to achieve there, as well as just all of the different tools that you described. So thank you. Appreciate all the comments around instructional design and just making the materials accessible and usable. Such a critical piece of that. So thanks. Lisa, let's turn back to Charleston. What all have you all been using to innovate? What tools and tricks have you picked up?
I just want to build on what Gabe said about access first and foremost, because you can't get anywhere unless students have access to the tools. And so we were fortunate that our state actually provided free internet opportunity for our students that districts could apply for. And I'm actually part of that system of disseminating with those MiFis. And we've disseminated over 3,500 MiFis, if that gives you an example of the need. And so then it's orienting people to the use of that, making sure that part of our, again, the human factor, orienting with our teachers that when students are not engaged, if they're not joining the Zoom, if they're not completing their work, if they're not submitting on Canvas, my own children have difficulty with that, thinking about the barriers of access first and foremost. So then reflecting on yourself as a learner, when you join a PD or, again, we're providing our PD in Canvas as well. So like when you go in and you look for that video, or you try to submit your assignment, or you try to have think about those challenges, and then think about an 8-year-old, who might be home by themselves with a parent at work, and how to, putting that forward first and foremost in their minds. And so then thinking, how can we help you work through that, and trying to structure our professional development around that as well. And then provide, point of difficulty coaching around that. Some of the things as far as tools with professional development and working with the interventionists and the teachers that we work with, again, like I mentioned, Canvas, Zoom. We've also been using a lot of Jamboard. And so that real-time posting of ideas, trying to capture things and reflect them, sharing a screen and showing a Jamboard to capture Post-its of ideas, and then reflect on those, do them in advance of the meeting, and then reflect on them in the meeting, or do them in the meeting. And then developing some other expectations around professional development. How long are you going to have a session? What's the saturation factor? That to me is a technology in and of itself, just the instructional design technology of doing that. Make sure you have videos, make sure you have something that is engaging, that you have an opportunity for a breakout room, that you're using that annotate feature on your Zoom, to have a grid and people stamp where they feel comfortable with the material you just reviewed, either disagree to strongly agree, and again, modeling those things, hoping that they will then take that forward with their students. For our parents, Gabe mentioned that as well, and I think that's an important access and understanding piece, and helping our teachers help our parents. We did a lot of videoing of access, how to, and I'm sure other districts do that as well. We actually have a parent Google site for just the technology component of learning, how to navigate all the different features. And come to think of it, I should probably watch that to help my children submit on Canvas. I'm just teasing. They're teenagers, so there's a can't do, won't do factor there. But those were some of the things that we addressed, both from access perspective and then utilizing different platforms to deliver content.
That's great. Thank you so much for all of those examples, Lisa. Our team has found Jamboard to be a really helpful resource as well, particularly in promoting like the sort of visualization and consensus building through those kinds of tools. Padlet's been another one that we found to be particularly helpful. It's been a good one. I'm going to go ahead and move us into the rapid fire questions just to have fun and kind of close this out in terms of our questions. So we'll start it off with you, Christy. The first one is just name a blog, feed, or listserv that you read to keep up with developments in professional learning or educational technology.
Yeah, so I actually like the journal. The journal comes in my inbox. Maybe more comes in my inbox more than I actually click on it and read it. But when I do take a minute to look, I think that it gives a nice overview. So that's one that comes to mind. I actually read a piece early this morning out of the journal. So that's why it was in my head.
Thanks. Gabe, what about you? Blog, feed, or listserv?
In normal times, I would usually go to FETC every year, which often would help support me for the year to come every year. And so FET used to be the Florida Educational Technology Conference. It's now the Future of Education Technology Conference. And so following them and seeing who they're recommending has always been good for me.
Thanks, Gabe. Lisa, what about you? Blog, feed, or listserv?
Learning Forward has been a great resource for us here, and also Learning for Justice, actually. So it used to be Teaching for Tolerance, now it's Learning for Justice. So those two things paired together have been really helpful.
Great, excellent. I love it. Point to that resource. Thank you. All right, keeping it going. Rapid fire. What's a useful shortcut or hack that you figured out recently? Gabe.
Well, I'll talk about the one problem that I've been solving the most lately for teachers, and that is, so we've switched to a high flex model where teachers are teaching both in-person students and students at home, and they're trying to get their Zoom meeting to display the audio to be on the TV so that the students in the class can also hear. And so there's just a little arrow right next to the mute button that allows you to pick where your audio comes out from. And so oftentimes they panic that they can't hear their kids, and it's always coming out of their computer. So it's just a very quick way to get the audio to go to the right spot.
Simple fixes are the best.
Yep.
All right, Lisa, shortcut or hack?
Well, I just learned that when you do your breakout sessions, that you can have them by category. So we did professional development where we had elementary, middle, and high, and then we set that category, and then they were principals. They were able to then select their group that they belonged to, so then we could then have targeted breakout sessions with them.
Yeah, I love that. Was a great feature.
The key with that is that everybody has to update their Zoom, because if they haven't updated their Zoom, they might not be able to choose their breakout room. So that another tip.
Gabe, I needed you and that PD. We did not. Thank you. That explains a lot. Yep. I was a little late to the party on that feature, I guess.
Christy, what's a shortcut or hack that you figured out?
Yeah, that was actually, I looked at these questions earlier. I'm going to say Lisa stole mine. That was mine. But I will say in the spirit of that, Lisa, because that was the best update that like ever happened in Zoom, was this idea of being able to set the categories and let people go to the rooms instead of trying to preload that as a facilitator. But it's still faster. So even when you have half your attendees that have not updated their Zoom, which happens, at least now we're probably down to like a quarter of them still haven't updated their Zoom. It's still faster to look at them and throw them in those categories than it ever was before. So, I would say that that's the hack. And then this is maybe something that everybody knows now. So I feel like if you had asked last March, this would have been an interesting detail, but now because everyone's a Zoom expert, it's not so interesting anymore. But there's like the feature that you can make yourself look better, like the filter in Zoom. So if you haven't already, go find your Zoom filter and give yourself a makeover. So yeah.
Love it. Thank you. Our last rapid fire question, we're coming to you first, Lisa, and that is name an education practitioner or scholar that you want to have a cup of coffee with.
Well, I would love to have a cup of coffee and probably more than that with Brene Brown, because I think that she could really provide some insight that I could carry forward to the rest of the people that I work with.
She only minorly inspired these rapid fire questions. All right, Christy.
Probably the Heath brothers, right? There are two of them. Chip Heath comes to mind, Power of Moments, Switch, Decisive. I would like to have a cup of coffee with those guys. And if they weren't available, then maybe Alfie Cohn.
Okay.
Might be another, just because what might come out of his mouth in a cup of coffee, 30-minute chat would be interesting.
Excellent. Gabe, bring us home on this. Education.
So I unfortunately, I think I missed my opportunity because he passed away recently, but that would be Ken Robinson, and how to restructure creativity and thinking about school cultures. That's who I would have liked to have a cup of coffee with.
Sir Ken Robinson. Thank you very much, Gabe. Well, that's all the questions that I have for us, but I do see that we have a question in the Q&A box, and so I want to put it to you, and whomever it strikes can respond, and we can build on it. We see it's have you encountered any non-English speaking students who have encountered challenges with technology? And if so, how have you assisted them in understanding technology?
I can answer that. I mean, we definitely have. Even from an access perspective, to speaking back to the MiFis of how to set those up. So making sure that we had all our directions. The Spanish is the predominant other language that we have within our district. And then also trying to set up a system. I put this in the category of systems of supports. So first of all, understanding student needs, and then knowing how to communicate those needs to the right people immediately. And so thinking about helping our teachers understand what to look for. Obviously, this one is pretty straightforward, but in general, speaking to what are our student needs, who do I go to for help? And so do I have a professional learning community within my building that I can network with immediately to explain those concerns? And then within our school, specific to this issue would be, where are our parent advocates, our bilingual staff? We have a whole department that specializes in English language learners. So how do we connect to them when needed? For either mass translations or interpretations, or specific to technology, some expertise, as well as the language barrier. So again, just networking those concerns quickly and then finding the right people to help solve them.
Thanks for that response, Lisa. Christy or Gabe, did you want to add anything here?
Yeah, I think to Lisa's point, being connected into your systems of support and making sure that you have both, proactive plans in place to minimize as many barriers in, the core design of the lesson, the use of the technology. That's really important, is to try, to really try to minimize those barriers up front, but then also be ready in terms of your system to provide that just-in-time response, so that you're not leaving a learner or a family in a position where they're feeling excluded from whatever educational opportunity is the goal.
Thanks, Christine. All right, I'll give it another second to see if we have any other questions come through. Thank you very much for the question, Marcia Marie Mosley. And maybe what I'll do while we are waiting is just to orient you. We've provided some resources here. There's a few journal articles that we thought were relevant to the discussion topic today that we're sharing here, as well as some resources at great schools. And then Charleston County School District has the virtual calming room link here that we wanted to provide. And so they're here on the screen, but I've also placed them into the chat. So they're coming out to you right now. So that you can get those URLs directly or click the links so you can access them in your browsers. I don't see any other questions coming through. So what I'm going to do is thank our panelists. Just really appreciate you making the time and sharing your experience, your wisdom, your expertise with me and with our guests here today. Really learned a lot about your efforts in virtual professional learning and just trying to create a great space for both teachers and students. And so I want to personally thank you. I also want to wish you all and all of our participants good health. Moving forward, please take good care, and I'll go ahead and turn it back to Jerry.
Thank you, Phil. And I'd like to thank again the panelists for today. It was wonderful. I have to say that I actually did access these resources and I did love the calming room. I will certainly be accessing that probably daily. So thank you. I know that that came out of our conversations this week, and I'm glad we were able to share it with those who are in attendance today. Again, this presentation could not be made possible without the dedication from UF Lastinger Center and Cognia. So I would like to thank them for this wonderful partnership that we've established. Everyone, the copy of this video will be available on remoteed.org. We have a video series of our weekly shows. So that will be made available to all panelists as well as those who are attending, and then to the public. Again, thank you, and we wish you good health, and see you next time on edTrends.
Bye, everybody.
I thank you all.
Thank you.